The letter was only 43 words long. 43 words that changed everything. It wasn't a legal document. Wasn't a deed to land. Wasn't even a proper introduction. It was scrawled on brown paper in ink that had bled at the edges, like the person writing it had pressed too hard. Like every single word cost them something. And when Caleb Horn read it for the first time, standing alone in his kitchen at dawn with the smell of burnt coffee filling the room, he read it 3 times before he sat down. He hadn't expected an answer at all. He'd sent his advertisement to 3 newspapers, one in Missouri, one in Tennessee, one in a small Kansas town he'd never visited. A mail-order bride notice. Nothing fancy, just the truth. A man with land, a horse, and a need for a partner who wasn't afraid of hard work and open sky. But this letter, this particular letter, didn't read like the others he'd received. It didn't promise sweetness. Didn't mention cooking or sewing or how well she got along with children. It said something else entirely. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Wherever you are, sending love your way. Now stay with me because this story is the kind that doesn't let go. What that letter said, and what stepped off that stagecoach 3 weeks later, would shake the whole town of Red Rock to its bones. And it would cost a man everything he thought he knew about himself. Caleb Horn was 34 years old and had lived alone for 6 years. Not because he was a difficult man. Not because he didn't know how to talk to people. He knew how. He just didn't see the point of saying things that didn't need to be said. He was the kind of man who'd tip his hat at a neighbor without smiling. Not because he was unfriendly, but because the tip of the hat said everything. He was built like the land he worked. Wide-shouldered, weathered, quiet. His face had that particular kind of lines that only come from years of squinting into sun and wind, from years of working ground that didn't always want to give back what you put into it. His hands were calloused. His eyes were the color of the dust that rolled across the flat Texas plain every afternoon around 3 o'clock. He ran a cattle operation on the western edge of Red Rock County. About 400 acres. Enough to be respectable. Enough to be exhausting. He had 2 hired hands. A young Mexican boy named Tomas who barely spoke and a one-eared old-timer named Dutch who talked too much to make up for it. The house was stone and timber. 2 stories. Built by Caleb's father when Caleb was still a boy, and added onto twice since then. It had 6 rooms. 6 rooms for one man. His mother had passed 4 years back. His father 7 years before that. He had no brothers or sisters that still lived nearby. No cousins who'd settled close. Just the land, the cattle, and the silence that wrapped around everything in the evening like smoke from a dying fire. He wasn't unhappy. That was the honest truth, and it's important to say it clearly, because this isn't a story about a lonely man who was miserable and desperate. Caleb Horn was not miserable. He was just incomplete, like a sentence that makes sense but feels like it isn't quite finished. The idea to advertise had come to him on a Tuesday in March, during a particularly brutal windstorm that kept him inside for 3 days straight. Dutch had suggested it half as a joke. Caleb had sat with the idea the way he sat with most ideas, quietly turning it over, setting it down, picking it up again. By Thursday evening, he'd written the advertisement. Cattle rancher, 34, honest and hardworking. Owns 400 acres in West Texas. Seeking a wife of sound character who is not afraid of hard work, wide open country, or the occasional difficult day. She must be able to ride. Everything else can be learned. That was it. No promises of romance. No flowery language. Just the facts, the way Caleb understood facts. He sent it to 3 papers. He expected nothing. He received 11 responses over the following 2 months. 8 of them were polite and proper. Women who talked about their domestic skills, their faith, their willingness to relocate. 2 of them included small photographs. One woman included a pressed flower, which Dutch thought was charming and which Caleb found slightly confusing. He read each letter carefully. He tried to be fair. He wrote back to 3 of them politely, asking follow-up questions. The conversations fizzled out the way conversations do when both parties are being careful instead of honest. And then, on a wet Monday in April, the 43-word letter arrived. He'd been in the barn when Tomas brought it in from town. He tucked it in his shirt pocket and didn't open it until after supper, when the dishes were done and the lantern was burning low on the kitchen table. He unfolded the brown paper. "Mr. Horn, you said she must be able to ride." "I can ride. I can also shoot, track, set a broken bone, and read Latin. I am not what you are picturing, but I am honest. If that matters to you, write back. If it doesn't, burn this letter." Caleb stared at it for a long time. He read it again, then a third time. "I am not what you are picturing." He turned the paper over, looking for something more. There was nothing. No hometown listed. No age. No description. Just those words and that initial Voss. He sat back in his chair and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Curious. Not attracted. Not certain. Not hopeful in the way a man gets hopeful when he lets himself imagine things. Just genuinely, deeply curious, the way you get when you pick up a book and the first line is something you didn't expect. He wrote back that same night. He kept it short because the letter had been short, and there was something in matching the other person's rhythm. "Miss Voss or Mrs. Voss, or however you prefer to be addressed. Honesty matters more to me than almost anything else. Tell me more if you're willing. See." Horn. He posted it before he could think too hard about it. And then he waited. The reply came 10 days later. This one was longer. Not much, but longer. And it told him things that made him set the paper down twice before finishing it. Things that made him wonder what exactly he had set in motion. 3 weeks after that letter, the stagecoach from Amarillo was due in Red Rock at 2 in the afternoon. Caleb put on a clean shirt. He told himself it didn't mean anything, the clean shirt. It was just respectful. A person deserved to be greeted by someone clean. Dutch grinned at him from across the yard with that missing ear profile that always made him look like he was listening sideways to the whole world. "Don't say anything," Caleb told him. Dutch said nothing, just grinned wider. At 1:30, Caleb saddled his horse and rode into Red Rock. He didn't know what Voss looked like. He didn't know how old she was. He didn't even know her first name. He knew only what she told him in 2 short letters, that she could ride, that she could shoot, that she could read Latin, and that she was not what he was picturing. The stagecoach arrived 11 minutes late. The door swung open, and Caleb Horn's clean shirt suddenly felt like it wasn't enough. The stagecoach from Amarillo carried 4 passengers that afternoon. The first one out was a heavy-set merchant in a wool coat that was entirely wrong for the Texas heat, mopping his forehead before his second foot even hit the ground. The second was a young couple, husband and wife by the look of them, the wife holding an infant wrapped tightly against her chest despite the warmth. The third was an older man with a preacher's collar and the tired eyes of someone who'd heard too many confessions. And then there was a pause. A beat of silence, the kind that happens right before something changes. A hand appeared at the edge of the coach door. Long fingers curled around the frame. And then she stepped down. The town of Red Rock wasn't a large place. Wasn't a particularly dramatic place, either. It had a main street with a general store, a livery, a saloon called the Copper Nail, a bank, and a sheriff's office with a broken window that had been broken for going on 8 months. The people of Red Rock had seen plenty in their time. Trail drives, dust storms, the occasional gunfight, a fever that swept through in 81 and took 9 people before it gave up. But when this woman stepped down from that stagecoach, the street went quiet. Not completely. Horses still stamped. A dog barked once somewhere. But the human noise, the murmur of conversation, the casual movement that stalled. She was tall. That was the first thing. Taller than you expected from a woman answering a mail-order advertisement. Tall with a straightness in her spine that suggested she'd never once slumped to make herself smaller for anyone. Her hair was dark, nearly black. Pinned up but not elaborately so, practical rather than decorative. Her coat was long and a deep charcoal gray, trail-worn at the hem but well-made above it. She had a rifle case, not a bag, not a trunk. Well, she had those too. A single leather trunk that the driver unloaded from the top without her asking. But she carried the rifle case herself. Didn't set it down. Held it with the ease of someone who carried it often. Her eyes swept the street with the calm efficiency of someone assessing terrain. not sightseeing. They landed on Caleb in about 3 seconds. She crossed the distance between them without hesitation. "Mr. Horn," she said. It wasn't a question. "That's right." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Miss Voss. Alara Voss," she said. "Since we'll likely be using full names before long, you might as well have it now." She extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were gray-green, the color of sage after rain, and they held his with a directness that wasn't aggressive but was entirely unapologetic. "You're younger than I expected," she said. He stopped himself. "Go ahead," she said. And there was something in her tone that wasn't quite amusement but was close to it. "You're not what I was picturing," he admitted. "I told you that," she said simply. She was 29. She told him this on the walk to where his wagon was hitched, offered it the way you offer relevant information, not to introduce herself emotionally, but because the fact was pertinent. She'd grown up in Missouri. Her father had been an army officer. Her mother had been the daughter of a Mexican landowner. She'd spent most of her childhood moving, army posts, border towns, a stretch of time in New Mexico that she mentioned briefly and then moved past. She asked about the ranch before she asked about anything personal. How many head of cattle? What the water situation was like. Whether he ran longhorns or a mixed herd. The quality of the grazing grass through summer. Caleb answered each question carefully, watching her absorb the information. She didn't write anything down. She just listened and nodded in the specific way of someone who was organizing what they heard into something useful. By the time they reached the wagon, he'd told her more about his operation than he'd told Dutch in 3 years of working together. She climbed up onto the wagon bench herself before he could offer a hand. He climbed up on his side. They rode in silence for a few minutes, heading out of town toward the ranch road. The afternoon heat pressed down on everything. The dust from the wheels drifted behind them in a lazy red cloud. "Why did you answer the advertisement?" Caleb asked. She was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, considering quiet. "Because you said she had to be able to ride," she said. "All the other advertisements I'd seen talked about cooking and children and managing a household. Yours talked about riding." She paused. "I thought that told me something about the kind of man writing it." "What did it tell you?" "That you needed a partner," she said. "Not a decoration." He didn't answer that. He turned it over in his head the way he did with most things that mattered. They were halfway to the ranch when she spoke again. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Her voice was the same, steady, direct, but something in it shifted. Something underneath the words went slightly taut, like a wire being tested. "All right," Caleb said. She looked straight ahead. The flat land stretched out in front of them, enormous and pale under the afternoon sun. "I came here honestly," she said. "Everything I told you in those letters is true, but there are things I didn't tell you. Things I need you to know before you decide anything." He glanced at her. Her jaw was set. Her hands rested flat on her knees, still. "When would you like to tell me?" he asked. "Tonight," she said. "After supper." She didn't say anything else, and neither did he. But he noticed that she kept looking in the side mirror of the wagon, looking back down the road behind them, like she was watching for something, like she was expecting to be followed. Supper was a quiet affair. Dutch had made a pot of beef stew that was better than it looked and a pan of cornbread that was worse than it smelled. Tomas set the table without being asked and then disappeared the way he usually did, silent as smoke. Dutch, however, did not disappear. He sat across from Alara Voss and watched her with undisguised curiosity, the way a man watches a weather system he hasn't seen before. Alara ate without apparent discomfort under his gaze. She complimented the stew genuinely and asked Dutch how long he'd been working the ranch. He told her 5 years. She asked how he'd lost the ear. He blinked. Most people were too polite to ask, and then told her it was a knife fight in Santa Fe. She asked what the fight was over. He said a horse. She nodded like that made complete sense and passed him the cornbread. By the end of the meal, Dutch was 3/4 in love with her, which Caleb noted with something between amusement and unease. After, Dutch cleared the plates with suspicious enthusiasm and made himself scarce. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her and kept one for himself. He sat down. He waited. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. "I was married," she said. He didn't react. He just listened. His name was Raymond Voss. I took his name, obviously. We were married for 4 years. He was charming at first, the kind of man who fills up a room. But he had debts. Bad ones. And a temper that got worse the deeper into debt he went. She spoke with precision. Not coldly. There was something beneath the words, something careful and controlled, the way you carry a glass that's full to the brim. But she was choosing each sentence deliberately, not letting the emotion run ahead of the facts. "He died 14 months ago," she said. "Not by my hand. I want to be clear about that. He was killed in a dispute over a card game in a saloon in Baton Rouge. I was not there. I found out by letter." Caleb nodded slowly. "When he died," she continued, "I thought that was the end of it. The debts, the trouble. I thought it died with him." She took a slow breath. "I was wrong." She told him the rest carefully. Raymond Voss had borrowed money from a man named Cord Beaumont. Not just money, a substantial sum, tied to a deal that had gone badly in ways Caleb didn't fully understand and she didn't fully explain. When Raymond died, Beaumont had decided the debt transferred. Not to Raymond's estate, there wasn't one worth speaking of. To Raymond's wife. Alara had left Louisiana with what she could carry. She'd spent the last year moving Arkansas, then Oklahoma, then West Texas. She'd answered Caleb's advertisement from a boarding house in Amarillo while watching the street from a second-floor window. "Beaumont has men," she said. "I don't know how many. I know he sent at least 2 to find me in Arkansas. I lost them in Oklahoma." She paused. "I think." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved across the flat land with a low, steady sound that was almost like breathing. "So when you write back to me," Caleb said slowly, "and you tell me honestly, did you come here because this was the right opportunity? Or did you come here because you needed somewhere to disappear?" She met his eyes. "Both," she said. "I won't lie to you. I told you honesty matters to you, and I meant it when I said I'd match that. Both things are true. You offered something real, land, work, a partnership. That matters to me. But I also needed to get somewhere far from Louisiana. Far and quiet." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm not looking for a shield. I'm telling you the truth so you can make a real decision with real information. If you want me to leave tomorrow, I'll leave." Caleb looked at his coffee cup. He thought about the 6 empty rooms. He thought about the letter she'd written. 43 words. Not one of them wasted. He thought about the way she'd looked back down the road. "What does this Beaumont want exactly?" he asked. "Money? Revenge. I believe he wants the money Raymond owed him," she said. "Which I don't have. But men like Beaumont, they want the point more than the payment. They want people to know they can't run." Caleb set his cup down. "Can you actually read Latin?" he asked. She blinked, just once. Then something in her face shifted, just slightly, some small fortification lowering by an inch. "My mother taught me," she said. "Her father was educated in Spain." She thought it was important. "Can you actually set a broken bone?" "I've done it twice." "On a person?" "Once on a person. Once on a horse." He nodded. "And you can ride," he said. "Better than most men I've met." He stood up, carried his cup to the counter, stood there for a moment with his back to her, looking at the window and the darkness beyond it. "You'll take the upstairs room at the end of the hall," he said. "There's a lock on the door, the keys in the nightstand." He turned around. "We'll figure out the rest." She looked at him steadily. "You're not asking me to leave," she said. Not a question. Something else, something she was making sure she understood correctly. "No," he said. "Why not?" He picked up her empty coffee cup and his own and set them in the basin. "Because you told me the truth when you didn't have to," he said. "And because anybody Cord Beaumont wants to find that badly is probably somebody worth knowing." He turned off the lamp. "Get some rest, Miss Voss," he said. "The work starts early." He went upstairs. Behind him, in the darkness of the kitchen, he heard her exhale. Just once. Slow and long, like something she'd been holding for a very long time. 3 days later, 2 riders came up the road toward the ranch. Caleb saw them first. It was just after dawn on a Thursday, the air still carrying that brief cool that the Texas morning offered before the heat claimed everything back. He was at the fence line near the eastern pasture, checking where one of his steers had gotten through the night before, when he looked up and saw the 2 figures moving up the long dirt road from the county track. They weren't moving with the loose, unhurried walk of travelers. They were riding deliberate and close together, the way men ride when they have a specific destination and they know exactly where it is. Caleb watched them for 3 seconds. Then he walked back toward the house, steadily, not running, because running changes the air around a ranch, and Dutch and Tomas would notice and come out, and right now he didn't want anything moving that wasn't supposed to be moving. He went in through the back door. Alara was at the stove. She looked up when he came in, read his face, and put down the pan she was holding. "Riders," he said quietly. She didn't ask how many or how far. She moved to the side window, stood back from it, and looked out at an angle. He watched her watch them. Her expression didn't change in any dramatic way, but her jaw tightened a millimeter, maybe 2. Her breathing stayed even. Her hand dropped to her side, not reaching for anything, not yet, but placing itself where it would need to be. "The one on the left," she said quietly. "Gray hat, big roan horse. You know him? I've seen him before. In Arkansas. A beat. His name is Pruitt. He works for Beaumont." Caleb's mind was already moving, mapping the ranch in his head, accounting for Dutch and Tomas, thinking about what he had available and what he didn't. "The other one?" he asked. "I don't know him." He nodded. "Stay in here," he said. "Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his name. He paused. "I'm not hiding in a kitchen," she said. Her voice was level. Her gray-green eyes were steady. "That's not who I am." He looked at her for one long second. "Fine," he said. "But you let me start the conversation." She held his gaze, then gave one short nod. He walked out the front door. The 2 riders pulled up to the fence gate. Pruitt, the gray hat, the big roan, was somewhere in his 40s. A wide, flat face with pale eyes and a beard that was more neglect than intention. The kind of face that didn't change expression much because it didn't need to. His type communicated with position and stillness. The second man was younger, edgy in the way young men are when they're trying to prove they aren't. Caleb stood on his porch with his thumbs in his belt. Not on a weapon, just standing the way a man stands on his own land. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Pruitt said. He had a Louisiana accent, thick and slow. "Nice spread you got here." "Thank you." "Horn, is it?" "Caleb Horn." "That's right." Pruitt looked at him with those pale eyes. "We're looking for a woman, traveling under the name Voss. Alara Voss. Had some dealings with a business associate of ours, and there's outstanding matters need to be settled." "What kind of matters?" Caleb asked. "Financial," Pruitt said. "Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Horn. Just a woman who owes money she hasn't paid." The front door opened behind Caleb. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He heard her footsteps cross the porch and stop just to his left. Pruitt's pale eyes shifted to her. Something moved through them, recognition and then something colder. "There she is," he said quietly, almost gentle, which made it worse. "Mr. Pruitt," Alara said. "Miss Voss." He tilted his head slightly. "Long way from Louisiana. I'd say the same to you. That you would." He brought his hands to rest on his saddle horn, a gesture that was supposed to look casual. "Mr. Beaumont sends his regards. He'd like to settle this matter quietly. The debt your husband incurred, there's a number been agreed upon. You pay it. Everybody goes home." "Raymond's debt is not my debt," she said. Her voice was even. "I had no part in that arrangement. Mr. Beaumont disagrees. Mr. Beaumont is wrong." Pruitt's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his face shifted slightly, like a door being pushed from the other side. "Miss Voss," he said, "you're a smart woman. Smart enough to know that whether Mr. Beaumont is right or wrong doesn't change what he's capable of." There was a long silence. The wind moved across the yard. Dust lifted and settled. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped once. "Gentlemen," Caleb said quietly. Both men looked at him. "I'd like you to hear something from me clearly, so there's no misunderstanding later." Pruitt waited. "Miss Voss is on my land," Caleb said. "She is here with my knowledge and my welcome. Anything that concerns her concerns me. That's not a threat. That's just a fact I want your employer to have." He looked at Pruitt with steady eyes. "You'll want to tell him that directly. Don't let anything get lost in translation." Pruitt studied him for a long moment. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," he said. Not angry, almost conversational. "Probably not," Caleb admitted. "Few people ever do." Another silence. Pruitt looked from Caleb to Alara and back again. Then he pulled his reins, turning the roan. "We'll be in the area," he said as he moved away. "Case you change your minds." The young man followed without a word. Caleb and Alara stood on the porch and watched them ride back down the road until the dust closed behind them. He became aware that Dutch was standing at the corner of the barn with a rifle, which he lowered only now. Alara said nothing for a moment. Then, "Beaumont won't accept that answer." "I know," Caleb said. "He'll send more men." "Probably." She looked at him. "Why did you do that?" He thought about it honestly. "I don't let men come onto my land and threaten people who are under my roof," he said. "Doesn't matter who they are." She was quiet again. "You should know," she said at last. "There's more to this than the money. There's a reason Beaumont wants me specifically." Caleb turned to look at her. "Tell me at supper," he said. He went back inside to get his rifle. She told him at the table after dark. After Dutch and Tomas had retired and the ranch was quiet, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the house settling and the far-off cry of something wild crossing the plain. She told him about the ledger. Raymond Voss had been many things. Charming, reckless, ultimately ruinous. But he had also been, in some buried chamber of himself, a man who knew he was going to end badly. And men who know they are going to end badly sometimes take precautions. He had kept records. Not of everything, but of enough. Names, dates, amounts, agreements made in the gray spaces between legal and illegal. Cord Beaumont's operations in Louisiana ran through 3 different fronts. A shipping company, a land holding company, and a bank, and Raymond had been involved at the edges of all of them. Close enough to observe, careful enough to write it down. He'd given the ledger to Alara 6 months before he died. He'd handed it to her on a Tuesday evening without any particular fanfare, wrapped in oilcloth, and said simply, "Keep this somewhere he won't look. And if something happens to me, decide for yourself what to do with it." She had never opened it in his lifetime. After he died, she had. Took her 3 days to read through it. She had training enough, her father's career, years of watching how men in power moved money, to understand what she was looking at. What she was looking at was enough to ruin Cord Beaumont completely. Multiple federal violations. Land deals that had displaced people through fraud. Payments to judges and elected officials. The kind of records that, in the right hands, could dismantle everything the man had built over 15 years. She'd written to a federal marshal in New Orleans. Anonymously. Included copies of 4 pages. The marshal had written back. Also carefully, also guardedly. To say he was interested, that if she could deliver the original, there was a path forward. That was 8 months ago. She was still carrying the ledger. It was in the lining of the leather trunk that currently sat at the foot of her bed upstairs. Caleb sat with this information for a long time. The lamp burned low between them. "Why didn't you just deliver it?" he asked. 8 months ago. "Why didn't you go straight to the marshal?" "Because I was being followed before I could," she said. "Someone in the marshal's office told Beaumont, or Beaumont figured it out. By the time I understood that, I was already running." She looked at the lamp. "I've been trying to get somewhere stable enough, Safe enough to make the next move without getting caught before I can make it. And now you're here, Caleb said. And now I'm here. He was quiet again. Then, where's the nearest federal marshal you trust? She looked at him sharply. San Antonio, she said slowly. There's a man there, Harlan Cross. He served under my father for 2 years. I believe he's honest. San Antonio is 3 days' ride. I know. Beaumont's men are between us and the county road. Probably. Caleb stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the darkness over the flat land, the darkness that lay over everything like a held breath. He thought about his land, his cattle, his 6 empty rooms that now had one less that was empty. He thought about what a man does when the world comes to his door. I'm going to ride into Red Rock tomorrow, he said. There's a telegraph office. I'll send word to Marshal Cross in San Antonio. Let him know you're here, that you have what he needs, and that you need safe escort. Caleb, her voice was careful. If Beaumont intercepts a telegraph, I'll send it through a friend in Amarillo, he said. Relay. Take longer, but harder to trace. He turned around. I know a man who owes me a favor. She was watching him with those gray-green eyes, that steady, assessing gaze that he'd noticed from the first moment she stepped off the stagecoach. But something was different in it now, something that hadn't been there when she arrived. You didn't sign up for this, she said quietly. No, he agreed. I signed up for someone who could ride. The ghost of something, not quite a smile, but related to one, moved across her face. I told you I could ride, she said. You did. He moved to bank the fire for the night. We might need to prove that sooner than either of us planned. He paused at the door to the hallway. Miss Voss. Alara, she said. He considered this. Alara, he said. Whatever happens next, you didn't make a mistake coming here. She said nothing for a moment. How do you know that? She asked. I don't, he said honestly. But I know the alternative was worse. He went upstairs. She stayed at the table. Later, much later, he heard her go up to her room. He heard the quiet sound of the lock turning. He lay in his own bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the ledger in the lining of a leather trunk, and about Cord Beaumont, and about a gray-hat man named Pruitt who had pale eyes and had said we'll be in the area like a promise rather than a warning. He thought about Alara Voss, who could ride and shoot and set bones and read Latin, and who had answered his 43-word advertisement from a boarding house window she'd been watching out of for her life. He fell asleep around 2 in the morning, for he heard something, a sound that didn't belong to the night sounds of the ranch. He was out of bed before he was fully awake, hand finding the rifle in the darkness by instinct, feet finding the floor. Downstairs, the kitchen window shattered, and then the whole yard was full of men. They came with 6 men. Caleb counted them from the upstairs hallway window by the muzzle flash of the first shot, which took out the kitchen window and punched through the wall and buried itself in the far pantry with a sound like a fist hitting wood. 6 riders, spread across the front yard and looping around toward the barn. Not a panicked assault. Organized. Controlled. This wasn't Pruitt coming back to talk. Caleb heard Alara's door open before he'd reached the top of the stairs. She came out in the dark hallway dressed, rifle in hand. She'd slept prepared, which told him something about how she'd been living this past year, and she moved to the window beside him without being asked. 6, he said. I count 7, she said. He looked again. There, at the edge of the tree line where the east pasture met the fence. A 7th figure still watching, not shooting. Pruitt, she said quietly. Coordinating. That was worse. Dutch and Tomas are in the bunkhouse, Caleb said. The bunkhouse has a gun rack, she said. Your man Dutch, he'll figure it out. A second shot from the yard hit the front door. Then a third. Caleb made a decision. Backstairs, he said. Out through the kitchen. We get to the barn, we get the horses, we go. And the ledger. Get it. She was gone in 3 seconds, back into her room. Caleb went to his own room, pulled on his boots, grabbed his ammunition belt, and was back in the hallway in 30 seconds. She emerged from her room with the leather trunk, No, not the trunk. She'd cut the lining. She was holding a wrapped bundle the size of a thick book, which she tucked inside her coat against her body. They moved. The back stairs were narrow and dark, and Caleb knew every creak in them by memory. He went down with his back to the wall, rifle pointed low. She followed, one hand steadying against his shoulder. In the kitchen, the broken window let in the night air and the sounds of the yard. Boots on ground, a voice calling to another voice, a horse spooked by the noise and pulling at its tether. They went out the back. The bunkhouse was 40 yards to the left. There was a single lamp lit in there now, Dutch awake and moving. The barn was 60 yards straight ahead. Between them and the barn, there was open ground and one man working around the south corner of the house. Caleb saw him before the man saw them. He didn't fire. He moved, fast and low, crossing the open space with his shoulder forward, and hit the man with the full weight of his body before the man could bring his weapon up. They went to the ground together, hard, and Caleb had the barrel of his rifle across the man's throat in the next second. Not a lethal position, but a controlling one. "Don't," he said quietly. The man didn't. Alara was already past them, moving for the barn door. She had it open by the time Caleb was on his feet. From the front of the house, Dutch's voice roared something that was neither intelligible nor necessary. Its effect was to draw attention, and it worked. The shooting from the yard reorganized toward the bunkhouse. Caleb got to the barn. They saddled fast and in near darkness. She worked on her horse, he worked on his, and he was grateful without words for the fact that she knew exactly what she was doing. No instruction needed. No time wasted. 90 seconds. She was on her horse in 90 seconds from the moment they entered the barn. He kicked his own boot into the stirrup and was up. "East side fence line," he said. "There's a break in the wood, third post from the old oak. We go through there, we pick up the canyon track heading north. We can loop around to the Mescalero Road by sunup. That takes us away from Red Rock," she said. "Red Rock is where they expect us to go." He met her eyes in the barn darkness. "We head north first, then cut west. 2 days hard riding. We reach San Antonio on the back road." She nodded once. They went out the side of the barn low and fast, circling the east fence line in the dark. Behind them, the sounds of the yard, shouting, boots, Dutch's rifle cracking out once and then again. Men regrouping, figuring out what had happened. At the fence break, Caleb went through first. The wood caught at his horse's flank and the animal surged, half panicked, but held. Alara came through a beat behind him, and then they were out and onto the open plain, and the darkness swallowed them whole. They rode, hard and fast for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and the ranch and everything happening in that yard. The plain stretched out around them, enormous and indifferent under a sky white with stars, and the horses moved across it like they understood what was at stake. After the first hour, they slowed to a steady canter. Caleb's mind was on Dutch and Tomas. Dutch had handled worse. Tomas was quiet but competent. They would hold the bunkhouse, discourage any further advance, let the men in the yard realize their quarry was gone. It wasn't a perfect situation. It was the only one available. Alara rode beside him, slightly ahead, leaning forward in the saddle the way a person does when they've ridden for years and their body is part of the animal beneath them. She could ride. She had not lied. Somewhere around the third hour, when the sky had begun the subtle shift from pure black toward the charcoal edge of coming dawn, she pulled her horse alongside his. "You left your home for this," she said. "I'll go back," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "But that's true of most things." They rode on. The sun came up slow and red over the eastern plain behind them, painting the dust red and the sky violent and beautiful. The canyon track opened up ahead, familiar to Caleb, unknown to anyone following them. "We'll make it," he said. "Not a promise, just a decision." She looked at him sidelong, this woman who could ride and shoot and read Latin and had survived a year of running. "Yeah," she said quietly. "We will." And they rode into the red morning together. They made San Antonio in 2 days and 3 hours. Marshal Harlan Cross was a lean, white-haired man who had served with Alara's father in places that left marks on a person. When he saw her walk through his office door, dusty, trail-worn, a rifle case in one hand and a wrapped bundle in the other, he stood up from his chair without a word. She set the ledger on his desk. He opened it. Read the first 3 pages. Closed it. "I'll need a week," he said, "to do this right." "Do it right," she said. Cord Beaumont was indicted 11 months later. Federal charges. 6 counts, ultimately, though the full accounting of what the ledger contained would take years to fully surface. His operations in Louisiana collapsed within a year of his arrest. Pruitt disappeared. Some said he went to Mexico. Some said he didn't make it out of Texas. No one who said the latter seemed particularly troubled by it. The ranch was still standing when Caleb and Alara rode back up the road 2 weeks after they'd fled it. Dutch had a new crease in his hat from a bullet that had come closer than comfortable, and Tomas had developed an opinion about barricades that he shared at uncharacteristic length over supper that first night back. The kitchen window had been replaced. The lock on the upstairs room, the one at the end of the hall, was removed about 3 months later. Not because it was broken, because it wasn't needed anymore. They were married on a cold morning in December, outside, because neither of them particularly wanted to be inside for important things. Dutch stood up with Caleb. Tomas brought wildflowers that nobody knew where he'd found in December, but nobody asked. The preacher was brief. The vows were simple. Afterward, she looked at him across the small gathering with those gray-green eyes, clear and steady and unafraid, and said nothing. He said nothing back. They understood each other. It had started with 43 words. It had passed through fire and dust and open plains and long dark riding and the kind of silence that speaks. And what arrived on that stage in Red Rock, what stepped down with a rifle case and gray-green eyes and a trunk with a ledger in the lining, was not what Caleb Horn had been picturing. It was something better, something real, the kind of thing you can't plan for, the kind that finds you anyway. What would you have done in his place? Drop it in the comments below, I want to know. And if this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs a good story today. We'll be back with another one soon. The West has more to tell.